Well, let me take a moment to welcome you to Northstar. Very excited that you're here today. I want to take a moment to welcome all of you who are joining us online as well as our other campuses. We're excited to be able to worship together today, and I'm going to ask here at our PC campus as well as our other campuses, let's put our hands together and welcome everyone today to Northstar. So glad you guys are with us. If you haven't been with us, we've been in a series over the last couple of weeks together where we've been talking about married life in times of chaos. And today, we're going to talk about something that probably creates more chaos in a relationship than anything else. You may be thinking to yourself, what do you mean? Well, you ever notice that opposites attract, but they also attack, right? The reality is you put two people together and they begin to fight over certain things. And the number one issue that we fight about, according to Citibank, is the idea of finances. In fact, they did a survey of couples and discovered that 57% of people that were divorced because of money. It was an issue that they had in their life, and it was important to understand that you may be thinking to yourself, well, we all face financial pressures, and financial pressures lead to divorce. No, it has nothing to do with financial pressure. It didn't matter how much money you had or how much money you didn't have. In fact, as they looked at all of these couples, one of the things they discovered is whether they had $50,000 a year or $5 million a year, it didn't matter. The reality is they fought about finances for one reason, and we're going to talk about that. I think it's very, very important. In fact, I would tell you this. Most couples start off poor, right? At least most couples that I know. I mean, I don't know a whole lot of couples that start off with a lot of money, but most couples start off poor. In fact, when Angela and I first got married, we were so poor, we couldn't even afford to pay attention. I mean, we were poor. I'm telling you. For us, a date night was a bag of tater tots and a blanket in the living room. That's how we dated. That's about how much money we had. And the tater tots were usually on a credit card that wasn't paid with cash. It's just a reality. So when we started out our careers together, Angela and I, basically, as we met each other, were in college. And we decided that we wanted to get married. I talked her dad into it. He originally told me no. Her mom took him to dinner. I don't know if she twisted his arm, stepped on his toe. I'm not really sure what happened, but he came back from dinner. And he said, if you want to marry her, you can. But my greatest concern is your financial future and what you guys are going to do, because we were both in college. And I promised him that I would take care of her. And so both of us held down 2 jobs and went to school and worked really hard to try to begin to make our way. And let me just tell you this. Why times were stressful, one of the things that Angela and I discovered together is that those financial issues really weren't the major issue for us. They created problems in our marriage. They created stress. But anytime a marriage is under stress, you either come together or you get torn apart. And for us, it brought us together. We learned how to love each other through those difficult times. We learned how to change some things and to do some things differently. And so today, what I want to do just for a few moments is I want to talk about what's the big deal of marriage and money. Why is it a big deal? Now, I'm going to say this up front because I know this is going to happen. Some of you are going to go home today and you're going to fight. Okay? I'm going to try to help you not fight, all right? That's my goal. My goal is to actually help you go home and do some things that are productive. Some of you are like, oh, man, I wish I hadn't showed up today. This should have been another Sunday. But I'm going to tell you, I really think this is going to help you. Because I want you to know that I deal with this over the past 30 years almost on a weekly or monthly basis. Couples come in my office, they sit down, we begin to talk. And I'm going to talk to you just like I talk to them. And hopefully what I'm going to be able to do is to help you to be able to see some things of why this becomes an issue. And then in the very end, we're going to do some very practical things. I'm going to give you some very practical things that you can take home. If you don't have your notes out, you can go home later, download those notes. And the questions that I'm going to give you are in the notes. I actually put them in there so that you could talk about this later. That's how important I think it is. So why the big deal about money? There's 3 reasons. I'm going to give them to you up front. Vision, values, and temperament. All right, we're going to talk about those very quickly. The first one is, what happens inside of a marriage oftentimes is that couples basically do not have the same vision for their financial life. Their vision is different, all right? Now, vision is important. Let me tell you this, because I think that most couples don't understand. Your vision of money has to do with what you're trying to accomplish. Vision is always a picture of the future. This is where we're going. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what we want to do. In fact, vision questions around this whole idea of money are questions like this. Where are you going? What is it that you're trying to do? And once you start making some progress, how much money is actually enough? And that'll change over time, I promise you. If anybody here today is a financial advisor, don't take this personally, but when you sit down with a financial advisor, their number and your number are two totally different numbers. Trust me. It's a big deal. And what you think is enough and what they're probably going to coach you as enough are going to be two totally different things. And there's a reason for that. A lot of times it's because you're not thinking about the future, and we'll talk about this in just a second. So it's important that the two of you start off doing the same thing, that you're going in the same direction. In fact, most couples, when they get married, they're just trying to buy a car, right? They're just trying to pay the bills. They're trying to get a house. They've got these small goals, or you could call them big goals if you want, and they try to do it together. But the thing that happens is this. Oftentimes, two people get married and their vision of what their future is going to be is totally different. Let me just give you an example. A couple gets married. The wife decides, maybe 6 months into the marriage, hey, things are going well. We're off to a good start. We've got the house. We've got a car. We're moving in the right direction. Maybe a year or two in, she decides, I want to have a baby. His vision is a little bit different. He's like, well, I didn't think we were going to have a baby this early. I thought it was going to be a little bit later. And so he begins to coach her to stay at work. You need to stay at work. We haven't got started yet. We're still trying to work on some of these things. They've never really talked about it. And so she's wanting to come home and be a mom, have a baby, begin to start a family. He's thinking, well, you just need to keep working. And really, if he was just honest, he'd say, I'm not about to settle down. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first promotion they give me. I'm going to work up the corporate ladder, do everything I can to provide a great future for our family. And they begin to compromise on the baby, right? They begin to have the conversation. Well, maybe we can wait a little while before we do that. And just about the time they settle into a church, he's going to say, time to move again, because guess what? He's kind of chasing his dream and his career, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, let me just say this. I don't want to make the guy out to be the bad person here, because I see it happen the other way too. I've seen husbands pushed by their wife because she has a vision for what the future should be. She wants to live in a certain type of house. She wants to make sure that their children are able to go to whatever school they choose and to wear certain kinds of clothes and to have certain types of things. And so she begins to push him. You need to work harder. You need to work more. And he may be satisfied in his career and not really wanting to go anywhere else, but she pushes him to advance. Or she enters the marketplace and it quickly eclipses him in terms of success and ambition and begins to enjoy the money and the promotion and all of the things that go with it. And all of a sudden, she looks over at her husband and she grows increasingly agitated that he's not advancing in the same way. It's a different of a vision for their future, a vision of what they want it to look like. In fact, if you look there in your notes in Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 19, the Bible speaks of this. It tells us, where there is no vision, the people perish. Now, there are two key words here that I think are important to understand. The first word is the word perish. Perish just simply means this. Perish means to live without direction, guidance, or control. And what I have discovered over the years is that most married couples live without guidance, they live without direction, and they live without control when it comes to finances. There are two totally separate visions about what their future is going to look like. And it's important that you're on the same page. You see, there isn't a blueprint of what you're trying to accomplish, so neither one of you can read the other person's mind. She has a vision of what it looks like. He has a vision of what it looks like. And let me just tell you this, because this is important. When you've got two separate visions, you have a competing vision. And when you have competing visions, not only is there disorder and conflict and strife and tension, but there's difficulty that begins to come up in the marriage because there is radically different agendas on each part. And I see this all the time. I'll ask couples when they come in, I'm like, share with me your vision about your financial future, especially if this is what they're arguing over. Well, we don't have a vision for our financial future. Well, that's why you're arguing. Because believe it or not, you do have a vision. He has a vision and you have a vision, and those visions are competing with each other, and that's why you're at the place that you're at. James Emery White says this, where there's no shared vision regarding money, then the marriage is undermined at the most foundational level. What is your vision? What are you trying to accomplish in your life financially that you feel is important for the two of you to be on the same page, moving in the same direction. So the first thing is they don't have the same vision. The second thing is this: they don't have the same vision, but also couples do not have the same values. They don't have the same values. You see, this is so true of each and every one of us when we get married. If you're here today and you're single, I would tell you this: talk about this before you get married. What are your values concerning money? And what do they value even in their life? Values are important because guess what? Values determine the direction of your life. And you may be sitting here today saying, well, how do you know what your values are? Take out your checkbook and look at where you spend your money. What you value is where you spend the most money. All of us have values. And so you've got to step back and you've got to begin to say, what are our values? Now, the questions around values are some questions like this. We're going to come back to these. I want you to just listen for a second. Where should our money go, right? Are we going to spend it on a house? We're going to spend it on a car? We're going to spend it on, 401k? Like, where should our money go? Then, what is important, or what is important to prioritize, and how should it be spent, and to what degree, and on what are we going to spend it? And those are questions that you have to begin to ask. These are value issues, and they can tear a marriage apart. So think about it just for a second. This is what happens in marriages. She says, all right, I want to save for the kids' college. And he thinks to himself, no, I don't want to save for the kids' college. The kids need to do like me. They need to work a job. They need to work their way through college. They need to pay for it as they go. We're not going to pay for them to go to college. He's thinking, we're going to take that money, buy a boat, and we're going to enjoy the time that we have together now. That's his value, right? He values family time. He values fishing. He values being outdoors. And so he says, this is what we're going to do, where she values the kids' college and them paying for it. Or she'll say, let's send the kids to private school. And what he says is, I don't want to spend that money. I want to pay off the loan we took from college. I want to pay off our credit cards. And so there's a difference in values when they begin to look at the way they're going to spend. He wants to save the money so they can pay down their credit cards. And so there's no bad guys here, because really all it is, it's a set of different values. They've never talked about, okay, what are we going to value? What is the right and what's wrong? What are our priorities? What matters and what doesn't matter? And most couples, they never talk about that. You see, these are the moral compasses that guide every decision you make. If you don't know what you value, then you're just going to spend your money however you want to spend your money, and you're going to realize, hey, maybe you don't think it's a value, but you're valuing things that are different, and what it does is it begins to create problems inside of the relationship. Let me just tell you this. Over the years, it's amazing to me the number of couples that come and sit down with me, and they say to me, Pastor Marty, the biggest debate we're having in our home right now is giving to the church. Happens all the time. And I tell them, it's not an issue of giving to the church, it's an issue of value. One values it, the other does not. And that's just the reality. And so I say, tell me a little bit about your background. And you know what I usually find out? One grew up in a Christian home. Their mom and dad valued the church. They valued giving and tithing. They thought it was important. The other had no experience with it. And so guess what? As they look at it, they go, that's not a value to me. It's not important. We could be using that money for other things. We could be spending it in different ways. The fortunate thing for Angela and I, when we got married, is her dad was a pastor. We had the same vision as far as giving was concerned. For us, it was an issue of generosity. How much are we going to give, and how much do we want to give over the years? And so you've heard my story before. Every year we try to increase our giving. We try to give more because we want to be known as people who are generous. We want to be known as people who are generous because God has been generous to us. And so it's important to understand this idea of values. In fact, in Job chapter 34, verse 4, listen to what it says. It says, we should choose to follow what is right, but first of all, we must define among ourselves what is good. What is good? So what is it that you're going to value? What's important to you? So here's what I told Angela when we first got married. We talked about this oftentimes. This has kind of been a phrase in our household. We can have anything, but we can't have everything. Let me explain that. I told her early on, I said, Angela, you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything. I just need for you to define for me what is important. Do you want to live in a big house? Do you want to drive a nice car? I mean, what's important? Now, I'm not saying those things are important. I'm just saying for her and I was asking, what do you want? Because guess what? We can have some things, but we can't have everything. And we got to determine what those things are going to be. So as you get married, you got to decide what kind of house are you going to live in? What kind of car are you going to drive? If you're going to live in a big house and it's going to be expensive, you probably aren't going to be able to drive 2 brand new cars, right? So that's not a value. You say, okay, I'm probably not going to own a brand new car. We've only owned 1 new car since we've been married. I bought her a car after she had got through fighting cancer. I felt like she deserved a new car. And can I tell you something? It was the first time we were in debt with a car, and we said we'd never do it again. We paid it off. We were thinking about buying another one. I said, ain't no way we're going to finance it. We just ain't going to do it. And the reality is, we've just made, cars aren't a value to us. Does that make sense? It's just not a big deal. I can drive an old truck. I can drive a truck with a hole in the bottom of it. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just not that, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's not a value. And so you have to determine that. You determine what are your values. The third thing that I would say is this: couples don't have the same temperament. Now, this is important. We're going to spend a few seconds here. It's going to be kind of funny, but I want you to see this because this creates a lot of problems. Couples do not have the same temperament. Their temperament is different, right? You were attracted to somebody that was opposite of you. And here's the reality. It's important to understand this. See, it's important because each of us are different, but it's only when we can come to the table, embrace our differences, and see how those differences can make us better that we're really able to begin to function in a greater way. So let me just kind of give you a story that might help you with this just a little bit. You see, over the years, it's important to understand the difference of each other. So I'm going to give you a story. There's a story about a young lady by the name of Joan. She was a very careful woman. She had always been neat, organized, conscientious. Her life was orderly, and it even included her finances. I mean, she had never been in debt. If she ever put anything on a credit card, she paid it off immediately. She balanced her checkbook to the penny at the end of every month. She was on top of everything. She hated debt. And as a result, on few occasions, if she ever did use her credit card, she immediately paid it off. She never allowed there to be debt on it. She met a guy by the name of Kevin. They fell in love. Kevin was an incredible guy. He was charismatic. He took her to really nice dinners. He took her to nice theater shows and other things. He wined and dined her. She fell in love with him. And the two of them decided that they were going to get married. 3 months into the marriage, Joan wakes up one day and she thinks to herself, what in the world have I done? He was completely different than she was. He was not organized. Kevin spent every dime that he had ever made. In fact, he was the kind of guy that if he could spend it, he would spend it. And if he had $100 left over, he could stretch $100 for 2 weeks. It was about living on the 100 and spending the other 900 for him. That's just the way he was. And then Joan discovered that she was pregnant, and because she was pregnant, she had some complications. She was going to lose her job and going to have to be at home. And so now she's stressed out. She's thinking to herself, how in the world are we going to make it? What are we going to do? And he keeps saying, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. But what happens is Joan becomes overwhelmed with worry. She can barely sleep at night because she's got fear on the inside. And she becomes more critical of her husband because he's just recklessly handling the finances. Bills are coming in. She's not used to that. She always paid them ahead of time. He finds himself, not worried. He ain't going to worry about it until the late notice shows up at the house. He's repeatedly using credit cards and spending money they don't have. And Joan one day wakes up to use her cell phone and finds out it's been cut off. She is about to pull her hair out. She's thinking to herself, how in the world did we get to this place? And so what does she do? She begins to nag him. He gives in. He says, okay, if you're better with the finances, then you take it over and you begin to use the finances. And as she begins to get into the finances, she begins to realize that for over the past 2 years, as they've been together, he has never balanced the checkbook. He's never, hardly ever paid a bill on time. And she is just getting more and more stressed. And every argument that they have seems to come back to money. It's because they're different. For the first time in their relationship, they both wondered whether or not they were going to stay married or they were even going to be able to make it. Do you see what's going on in the relationship? It's two totally different temperaments. In fact, there's a financial advisor that writes about this. His name is Jerry Tuma. And he talks about the different temperaments. I want to give them to you just very quickly. The first one he talks about is what we call credit card Carol. Okay? Now, some of you ladies are like, oh, why did you do that to us? No, listen for a second. Here's what he says. Credit card Carol, she hates details and tends to act impulsively. She's one of those people who manages things by the seat of her pants. She spends money and then she worries about how she's going to cover it later. She hasn't balanced her checkbook in months, and I mean, well, why do you do that? Because the bank's going to send you a statement anyways, and as long as there's money in the account at the end of the month, it really doesn't matter. She has a hard time saying no, and is a sucker just for everything as far as a sales pitch is concerned. If she sees a bargain in the store, it doesn't matter. If it's a bargain, she's going to buy it. She's leveraged up to her eyeballs. The car payment hasn't been paid in 2 months, and she knows how to manipulate the credit cards and everything around her to make it work out so that they get to the end of the month. She stays just one step ahead of the creditors. She's always on the forefront. Secondly, notice this. He didn't say this, but I called it, get her done, Gary. Okay? Gary's a get her done kind of guy. I mean, he has got it together. Gary is an achiever. He's strong-willed, practical, and determined, and even driven. In fact, Gary works long hours making his climb up the corporate ladder. He does everything he can to advance. But he's very goal-oriented. The problem with Gary is he's so focused on the goal that whatever it takes to reach it, he has a tendency to overlook or downplay obstacles and pitfalls along the way. So Gary tends to feel that he knows better than everybody else, and he ain't willing to take advice from anybody. He's not going to talk to a professional. He thinks that he's always going to be one step ahead. So he's easily ensnared by the get-rich-quick schemes, the unstable franchises, the limited partnerships, the speculative investments, and the future markets because they promise to give him his goal now, right? I'm going to retire when I'm 50. The risk he takes and the debt that he assumes for his goals often cripples his financial irresponsibility, like Credit Card Carol, but it isn't the malls that get him, it's his goals that get him in trouble. Get her done, Gary. Good guy. He's motivated. But he's motivated in the wrong way. Some of you guys are sitting there going, that's me. Third one, notice this. Budget Betty. Budget Betty has got a budget. Some people are raising their hands. That's me. All right, Budget Betty. Budget Betty's got a budget. She loves her job. She's a computer programmer. She even thought one day she might be an engineer. She's equally could be an accountant, right? She keeps every penny tracked. She knows every dollar that's spent, every penny that's spent. She lives to the plan. But here's the problem with Betty. Betty is not a risk taker. She says, man, I ain't playing the stock market. You can forget that. There ain't no way I'm going to spend money there because guess what? That's dangerous. Betty takes her money and she puts it in a savings account that earns 2% interest, and she's going to do that for the rest of her life. She's not a risk taker. We're not going to take any risk. We're not going to spend any money. We're going to keep accounts of everything that goes on. And this can play out into something of a negative spirit, or at least an attitude that seems like she's negative. She's really not. She's very detailed, very organized. She's going to keep up with everything that is spent. The last person we talk about is what we call Take It Easy Tom. Take it easy, Tom. Tom's just laid back, right? He ain't worried about nothing in life. Tom's the kind of guy that he can be passive when things don't come. They just come as they do come, right? He's like, it just don't matter to me. He's worked for 15 years and loves his job. He's not looking for an advancement or promotion because guess what? He's got it down and can go to work every day, do the same thing, come home. And he loves to come home, get off work, watch TV, and play fantasy football. That's all that matters in life. There ain't nothing else too much more important than that. He provides for the family. He's non-confrontational. He doesn't like conflict. He also can be slow at making decisions. Financially, this can create a sloppy mess because he puts everything off as long as he can. Reconciling bank statements might happen about every 3 months. Paying bills, well, as long as they're paid, that's all that really matters. Dealing with financial realities, Tom says, you know what? It doesn't really matter. If it keeps coming up, we'll eventually deal with it. And so, Tom isn't like Carol spending everything he gets, and he isn't like Gary driven to success no matter what the cost. He sure isn't like Betty, who watches every single dime. Tom is just easygoing and doesn't want to mess with anything or mess anything up. Which means bills can mount up that cannot be dealt with. Things can build up and he can get his back against the wall, which is why he often is on edge and in the middle of a crisis. He's just easygoing. But it seems like everywhere he turns, there's turmoil all around him. So what happens when you mix these up? What happens when you put credit card Betty with Gary? What happens when two people come together? You see, there can be conflict, right? because there's different temperaments. And especially if they don't have the same vision and they haven't embraced the same values. Opposites tend to attract, but later they can repel each other. They can actually begin to attack each other. So what's the answer? Very quickly, let me just show you because I think this is important. There are 3 critical investments you have to make in your marriage. And I think this is important for all of us. And this is where I hope that you'll go home and you'll do some homework together, because I think it can make a huge difference in the way that you begin to handle money in your life. Now think about this. 57% of divorces happen because of money. Guys, I can help that not happen in your relationship if you'll do 3 simple things. The first one is just this. The first thing you've got to do, well, hold on a second. Proverbs 22:3. A prudent man foresees the difficulties ahead and prepares for them. That is, he looks down the road and says, okay, we don't have values. We haven't determined a vision. You're different than I am. We got different temperaments. So he prepares for them. The simpleton goes blindly and he suffers the consequences. See, here's the temptation. You're going to get up and walk out the day and go, you know what? That was pretty interesting. But the reality is, if you don't see what's in front of you, the difficulties that are ahead, you won't be able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. 3 things that you can do. 3 things that are important. The first one is this. First of all, forge a common financial vision. Sit down and talk about it. Say, okay, what is the vision we have for our financial future? And here are the questions, all right? Very quickly, look at these. What are we trying to accomplish or to achieve with our money? What do you hope to do? Do you hope one day to retire? You need to talk about that. And guess what? This can change over time. Let me just give you an example real quick, just real fast. A story for Angela and I. Angela and I had a specific time that we were hoping that we both would be able to retire. Now, we changed that over time. Over the years, as we begin to talk, we begin to say, you know what? Maybe that's not as important as we thought it was. Here's why. This is what changed for us, all right? Some of y'all know this. When Angela had cancer, everything changed. We said, what if we don't make it to 65? What if we're not able to enjoy some of the things along the way that we wanted to enjoy? Because guess what? We have friends that have been in that same situation, and we've watched people that we were close to literally pass away and not be able to fulfill some of these things together. So we said, all right, maybe retiring is not as important as early as we thought it was. Maybe it's more important that we spend some of it now and have a good time. And so I told my kids, we were at dinner a couple of weeks ago, I said, I just want to promise y'all something. There ain't going to be nothing left. Your mom and I is going to spend it all before we go. We're going to take trips. We're going to enjoy ourselves. We're going to have a great time. So don't be expecting nothing. I'm just letting you know. Secondly, and I got a verse for that too. See me afterwards and I'll tell you what the verse is. In Ecclesiastes, it talks about passing it on to the next generation, and it just blows away like the wind. Anyways, that's a whole nother sermon. How much is enough? You got to ask yourself, how much is enough? And so you know what? We even adjusted that. We said, you know what? Maybe we don't need that. And I even said, maybe I'll work a little longer. Some of y'all are like, no, go ahead and retire. I'm just joking. Then notice this. How will we know when we get there? How are you going to know when you get there? If you haven't defined it, you're not going to know. And so there's this moving target, and it just creates tension. So you've got to come up with a common vision and decide, this is where we're going, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Secondly, establish a shared set of financial values. Now, here's what's important here. These are in your notes. You can take these with you. You can look at them later. But here you're saying, where should our money go and how much? That's where you begin to say, okay, we can have anything, but we can't have everything. What's important to us? And there's nothing wrong with it, guys. Some of you may say driving a new car is important. You know what? And I want to make sure every 3 years I've got a new car. That's fine. You just got to plan for it. You've got to set the money aside. You've got to decide how you're going to accomplish that, if that's a value. Secondly, what is important for us to prioritize? What are the things you're going to prioritize around? And then thirdly, notice this. You got to ask yourself, how much are we going to give? I think you need to talk about that. If you're single, let me tell you something. You better talk about that before you get married. Because that's the number one issue that people sit in my office and say, we just can't decide on this. And you got to decide. You got to come together and say, how much are we going to give? And so here's what Angela and I do. We have a budget where we give to the church, that we have a certain amount that we give. And then we have what we call extra generosity, so that when we're out eating, we're out doing different things, we see somebody in need, we can also be generous in those areas. And so we have money set aside so we can continue to be generous in everything that we do. And then notice this. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5, 6 through 9, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Honor the Lord with your wealth, is what He says. Here's the reality, guys. You got to put God first in everything. And can I tell you why most couples get in trouble? It's because God is not their priority. He's not first in everything. In fact, let me just tell you this. The greatest financial advice in the world is right here in the Bible. And most couples never open it up. You got to ask yourself, who is going to be the source of the truth that you believe? And whatever the source of the truth you believe is, you have to determine. So for Angela and I, we said, God is our source. And if God says give 10%, we're going to give 10%. If God says to honor Him, we're going to honor Him. If God says to be generous, we're going to be generous. We just said God is the source of everything for us. And so it doesn't matter what everybody else says. For us, it matters what God says, because one day we're going to stand before Him and give an account of our life. And we want to be able to look at Him and say, God, we did everything that you asked. We were faithful with what you gave us. We did exactly what you asked us to do. So honor the Lord with your wealth. And then lastly, notice this. Accept and compensate for deferring temperaments. See, here's the deal, guys. Your temperaments can actually be a good thing. See, Betty needs a Tom in her life because guess what? Tom will allow her to be generous. Tom will say to her, hey, we need to find a way that we can be generous, that we can give to other people, that we can give to the church. And so they begin to balance each other out. Tom needs a Betty in his life, somebody that can say, Tom, and look, you got to take this seriously. You can't just spend money and not pay bills and do what you want to do. And so they complement each other, but you have to come to the table and say, hey, I'm thankful for your strengths and I'm thankful for your weaknesses. These complement each other, and together we can work hard and make a great relationship and a great future as we do what God's called us to do. And so over the years, Angela's strong in some areas that I'm not. And so I love my wife. Let me tell you something about Angela. I can give her $20, and 3 weeks from now, she's going to have $19.99. She may have spent a penny. She is great. And so I've learned over the years, I just give the cash to her, because if she gives it to me, guess what? I'm probably going to spend it. I'll do something with it. So I've just learned, man, if you want to keep money, give it to Angela. She'll hold on to it. She's great at it. And so we've learned over the years, we've just kind of webbed and flowed together. We know. And you know what's been amazing? In some of the areas that I was weak, she's made me strong. In some of the areas that she was weak, I've made her strong. God's used our personalities because we have the same vision and we have the same values. And we say, here's where we're going. This is what we're trying to accomplish. These are the things that we're going to do together, because that's what we believe is important. So, let me ask you today. I think this is important before we leave. What is your financial vision for your future? What are the values that the two of you embrace together? What values have you defined? And then thirdly, let me ask you this question, because I think this one's important. Do you appreciate the differences that each of you bring to the table? Number 4, as we pray. Who is your source of truth? Honestly. Who is your source of truth? Who are you depending on to define what your financial future should look like? And are you honoring what they say? Are you doing what God has asked you to do? And if not, then would you be willing to back up and begin to ask those questions? Hey, what is our vision? What are our values? Because values are where we spend our money. And then thirdly, are we going to embrace our differences and use them together to accomplish the vision and the values that God's given us? And hopefully God is the source. If He's not, I would pray today that you would begin to make Him the source, because it's the most important thing that you can do. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, the reality for each and every one of us is that, God, it's easy for us, if we're not careful, to not have the same value and the same visions as a couple. And God, my prayer over your church today is that, God, you would help each of us that are married to find ourselves at a place that we do have the same vision and the same values. And if not, I pray that, God, we would have time to sit down and talk about those things. That we would say, let's have an open and honest dialogue to define what our future looks like as far as our vision is concerned financially. And then to ask ourselves, what is it that we value? Because, God, when we don't value the same things, what happens is we fight, we stress one another out, and we find ourselves at a place that there becomes division in our relationship together. And then, Lord, I would pray that you would help us to value one another, to know that maybe when we look at the other person and we see some of the things in their life as a weakness, that, Lord, the reality is that we can strengthen one another. And I pray that you would help us to do that, that we would value the other person's opinion, that we would value who they are as a person, because, God, their temperament was given by you. You created them and you have uniquely designed them the way that you designed them. And when we value each other and we come to the table together, it changes everything. And when we allow you to be at the center of our life, God, you give us a vision and you give us the values and you allow us to value one another in such a way that it builds a stronger and a more incredible relationship with each other. And so, Father, I pray over your church today, Northstar. I pray over each of our campuses and for those that are joining us online today, that, God, you would unite us in this area of finances. That you would bring healing in marriages that have been divided by allowing them to talk about their vision and to define their values. And then, Lord, to embrace one another. And so, Father, we pray that as we put Christ at the center of our life, that our life simply would be better as we follow you. For we pray this in Jesus' name. And all of God's people together said amen and amen. Hey, listen, man, I love you guys. I'm praying for you this week. I don't want you to go home and fight. I want you to go home and answer these questions and work together by allowing God to be at the center of your life. And next week, we're going to talk about what happens when you have unmet needs in your relationship. What do you do as you begin to work those out? And so I'm going to ask our campus pastors if they would to come out, and we're going to turn the service back over to them. I love you guys. I hope to see you next week as we journey together in this series over the next couple of weeks together. God bless you.